Hello, welcome back to another episode of Come Over for Dinner. I'm so excited you're joining me today. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Lisa Leidenfrost. She is a missionary's wife, currently stationed here in Moscow, Idaho. She has written 3 books. One of them is At the Edge of the Village, Musings of a Missionary's Wife. The second one, the sequel, is From the Village to the Ends of the Earth. And hot news, she has a 3rd one coming out, All Your Waves and Billows, a story of trials, faith, and finishing a translation. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Moscow. You were a missionary's wife in Africa. You did mission work over there, and now you're all the way up in Idaho.
Yeah, actually went to college here, met my husband here. I was a part of Christ Church, which back then was called Faith Fellowship, way back in the day. I think it was only like 3 years after it started. And then married my husband, went overseas. And the first book kind of tells a little bit about what it's like to live overseas. We started a translation project in a village that had no written language. And we were the first missionaries to come in there.
And you had 4 children. I mean, you were raising 4 children at the time. You still have 4 children. They're grown now. She has 13 grandchildren and 1 due in October, which is very exciting. But you also were in Africa raising children.
Yeah, we went over there. My son was 2 and my daughter was 6 months. And we had to go through the orientation phase, which part of it was to drop us off in the jungle, just family by family. And my husband had to put up a shelter.
I remember reading that story in your first book, At the Edge of the Village. And it sounded like a nightmare camping trip.
It was interesting, but it was also fascinating and wonderful. And it was everything all combined.
Yes. Well, her book has lots and lots of stories that just are fascinating. They're incredible stories of missionary life. She does sell them on Canon Press. One thing they say on their website, it says they are mostly stories of the familiar things in life, the little things that lend spice to our daily experience. Not all of missionary life is extraordinary or bizarre. Most of it is just normal, common events that unfold one day into another. And because God is good, there is a beauty in living, a purpose beyond our own mere existence that can make even the smallest things we do burst with life and meaning, laughter and delight. Too often these small commonplace things go unnoticed unless they are caught and brought to life in words. Words which become a lens that can, even if for a single moment, bring this ever-present beauty into focus. And it was fun reading your book because, yes, ordinary things like raising children, cooking meals, things like that just came to life and made you really appreciate the small things and the blessings that God just pours out on us every day that we take for granted. So you were over there for how many years?
Oh, wow.
A long time.
It was a long time. 30 plus years. Well, actually, we had to come back due to the war.
Was there a civil war over in Africa?
It was a civil war.
Okay.
Yeah. And when it got really dangerous and we happened to arrive in the country at just that point is when they're going after whites.
They were just killing people or rounding them up and making them prisoners?
There was this genocide talk, and they got angry at the French. And it was just kind of an amazing story because the civil war is between the North and the South, the Muslim North and the non-Muslim South. And France and some other countries, they set up a peace zone right in the middle. Well, the South wanted to bomb the North, and they ended up bombing some French by mistake. And they said it was by mistake, but the French weren't so sure. So they ended up taking their planes and taking out the entire Air Force of Ivory Coast, which was 3 grounded aircraft. Okay, well, they didn't like that.
No, that would begin.
And so they came after
war
French.
For sure.
But once the rage comes in a crowd, you don't ask nationalities. And so there were some pretty harrowing times. And that goes into the 3rd book with us having to slip into the rainforest while we heard gunshots and everything. So
escaping with your with your lives.
But God got us out. It ended up being okay.
So the third book comes out any day now?
It'll be sold at Grace Agenda at the CCM booth. After that, Canon should be selling it and CCM.
Okay.
And Amazon should have it too.
Okay. So CCM stands for Community Christian Ministries. All three of her books could be found on Amazon, I would imagine.
The other two for sure. I don't know if they had to rush this one. So whether it's actually out yet on Amazon, but
right,
it will be soon.
But will be soon. Or Canon Press, or, we mentioned the three. Canon Press, Community Christian Ministries, or Amazon. So some great books. So tell us a little bit about your experience with hospitality in Africa.
Yeah, it's very different over there. And my husband grew up in Africa. He's the son of missionaries, and his father did a Bible translation project. His name is Chaba, but that's Hungarian, even though it sounds very African.
Mm-hmm.
So he was raised over there. So he knew a lot of the culture. And he knew, about hospitality and things. But to me, from my Western mindset, it was very interesting and very different.
Yes, I can imagine. Very different. For your second book, one of the descriptions that I'm reading, it talks a little bit about hospitality, which was so intriguing to me. It says, although there are exciting stories about the local witch doctor and escaping from a civil war, life as a missionary is often surprisingly normal. Family life need not be crowded out by frenetic translation schedules and fundraising furloughs. Whether it's the humorous cultural differences in hospitality or courtship, or the kids' adventures with driver ants, snakes, bees, a bush baby, or a parrot, from the village to the ends of the earth shows what it is like to raise a family while building the kingdom of God in Africa. You actually have an entire chapter on hospitality. Would you like to share that with us today?
Sure. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, I would love for you to read it and tell us a little bit about how you describe hospitality in this book, which will be a teaser for everyone to go and buy it and read it.
Yeah.
And enjoy this book full of good stories.
Yeah, well, this is chapter 39 on hospitality. A missionary was relaxing at the table after a meal of rice and sauce with his family and an invited guest. The guest, an African friend, leaned over and said to his host, I have worked with missionaries in the city for years, and you are the only one who has ever invited me in to eat. He said this with a hint of sadness, as if he had received a major rejection from the others. Maybe through his eyes he had. Hospitality is an extremely important concept in a country which believes time spent relating with people is more important than time spent working on things. In a village where everyone knows each other, if you have not invited people to share a meal when the appropriate moments arise, you have shown them your heart is not open to them. You are a closed book in an open society, a society judging closeness by time spent together. Hospitality in our village can come in many forms, but certain things are always the same. If people come to visit unannounced, which is the majority of the time, you always offer them water. Depending on who they are and how far away they have come, you can offer them Cokes or coffee as well, but you must never give them a list of choices. One day, Alexi's sister came to visit, and I offered her a choice of coffee, tea, or hot chocolate. She did not respond, but just stood there as if paralyzed. Her mouth moved, trying to say something. Her eyes looked around anxiously, and I could imagine her breaking out into a sweat. Alexi quickly came to her rescue, whispered rather loudly, "Just tell her you want chocolate." She mumbled the word chocolate rather weakly and stood there dumbly while I served her. Later, I asked Chaba about this odd behavior, and he said, people in this culture don't often make a lot of choices since their diet is limited. To have a choice is confusing. I agreed as I remembered my first reaction to the supermarket cereal aisle when we came home once on furlough. Another thing to consider, Chaba continued, is when you offer a choice of something, you are communicating that you are unsure of whether you really want to give it or not. You didn't tell them they could have it. You only asked them if they wanted it. There's a difference, What you need to do is tell them there is coffee for them. They will either accept or reject the offer, and no extra choice is required. I tried it next time with positive results. No one in the room went in a state of paralysis when I told them there was coffee waiting for them. But what if they really had wanted chocolate? Sharing meals is very important and has well-defined protocols. If some guests are still hanging around as lunchtime approaches, you need to invite them in to eat with you. You never chase anyone away by saying, well, I'd better get into lunch now, talk to you later. If for some reason you do not want them to eat lunch with you, then you do not eat yourself. How can you eat when you have turned your guest away empty? If the husband decides to forgo lunch, then his wife and kids may eat without him, out of sight. They do not really matter much in the scheme of things, as long as the headman is there to shoot the breeze with the guests. If it is obvious that someone keeps coming around during meal times and you wish that they would not, then just serve them foreign things like Jell-O and they will never show up again. That happened. And we didn't mean to. But it was so weird for them.
They thought, what is this strange substance they're forcing me to eat? And so as a culture, do they eat it to be polite? Are they going to choke down every bite?
Culturally, you have to take a taste.
Okay. So a taste, but maybe not having to eat the whole bowl.
It is different, of course, in America, where everyone knows they're supposed to leave the premises at mealtimes. If someone invites you to stay and eat unplanned, you know what you are to say. Affirm, no thank you. My repeated attempts on furlough to get my American friends to eat unplanned meals with me usually had the same result. They know culturally they should not stay because they assume my invitation also is culturally insincere. To them, I am just being polite, a politeness like a bud which produces no flower. Not so here in Africa. Everything is in full bloom as guests join you readily at every invitation. As a guest in Ivory Coast, if you are offered food and choose to accept it, you must taste it, but you do not have to finish it. No one is going to harass you to finish your food because others are starving in Africa. If you have accepted your host's food, then everyone is happy and the leftovers will go to the children, who eat to the side of the adults, usually sitting on the ground. Once an old woman came to visit us during mealtime. Chaba called out that we were eating and asked her if she wanted to join us. We did not think she would, but she did and entered an environment very foreign to her own. We watched as she shuffled slowly over to our table, laid her cane on the floor, and sat down, looking as if she felt rather out of place. She was used to sitting on a stool by the fire instead of on a chair at a table. We gave her some of our food, and she tasted it with hesitation. She did not eat much beyond the biscuit, but she seemed pleased that we had honored her by inviting her in. After an acceptable amount of time and many smiles later, she retrieved her cane, gave a Bakwe blessing, and took her leave by silently shuffling out the door. Sharing a meal means you care enough about your guests to welcome them into your home, even if it is unplanned. It means you will share what you have with them, even if it is but a little. It is not the amount or even the quality that really matters. It is merely the fact that you have invited them in and shown love using the cultural means of doing so. There is something about eating together that builds bridges and opens doors beyond the surface level. For a ministry like ours, it can make the difference between success and failure.
There are a lot of cultural differences there.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned multiple things, but one of the things that stood out was just how their culture looks at hospitality as a gift to them. Like you said, your American friends, they're thinking, oh, you're just saying that. But in Africa, they don't. It doesn't sound like.
No, they take you at your word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is.
But they're a very communal society. They live outdoors. They're just one big family, so to speak. And so very, very communal.
And how interesting that the children sit next to the adults and the adults just give them a portion of whatever's on their plate.
Oh, well, no, they'll get their own, a bowl of food. But if someone doesn't finish it,
the leftovers
usually they'll give
go
the
to the
best
kids.
of the best to the guests, and then they will just devour.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that chapter, you can tell the importance of hospitality.
It is.
And how important it is to those people and how that would make a big difference in your ministry. If
it does.
That's really the beginning. If someone feels like you care about them, they're loved, they're welcome into your life, then they're much more open to hearing the gospel, hearing what you have to say past that.
It can be overwhelming, for missionaries at first. Now, when I'm talking about these, cultural things, it's for an African village in West Africa. And then we have different ethnicities, there's a north and the south, but this is for our region. Mm-hmm. But I would say it's pretty Pan-African, in the sub-Saharan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's just, and it doesn't matter. This is a big difference. I think here we want to have everything perfect. We want to have the house straightened, the meal just right on. And if we can't, then we don't invite over. And so, but in Africa, it doesn't matter. You could just, the house could not be up to par. It could be very little. It doesn't matter. You've invited them in. You've opened your heart. And so that says it all.
Do people in Africa come to your home often just maybe as a drop-in rather than it being invited? Do they just stop by to say hi? It's just a very common occurrence.
Yeah. And it's interesting, since they're so very communal, the issue of privacy, personal privacy, is very different from ours. We have our personal space. We invite in, and then people come, but it's at invite. And that's why, culturally we know not to just drop in unannounced unless we know someone really well. You know what I mean? It's just different. The African society in general is very people-oriented. And so people take precedence over getting things done. Now, we had to do some balancing to try to get things done, because we'd get so many people. But with people coming, we would go and we'd offer them water, often sit and just chat. But Chaba had to literally remove himself and go to another space to get translation done.
Because he wouldn't be able to work because of people visiting all day long.
Yeah. But then he would have hours where he would visit. And then we'd go off in the village and greet everyone. And so that's a really important part for them accepting the translation.
What about raising children there? I just think about when I was raising children, all the to-do list. You're trying to do school, you're trying to get chores done, you're trying to get the house clean, you're trying to get the meals prepped. How did you balance people coming in and you feeling like you needed to offer hospitality, give them attention? How did you balance that with a daily life?
It wasn't easy. It was not easy. And this is what gets, I think, a lot of missionaries, why it's not feasible for them to live in a village. Since my husband grew up, not actually in a village, but very close to one. His father was a translator. So he had some really good ideas. And in other words, you have to survive. We have to look at, I need to be here long-term to be effective. I'm American. I do have personal privacy, and I do want to pour into the kids. Because in the village, it's like everyone's job to raise the kids. But sometimes they fall through the cracks, you know what I mean? Very, very communal. We would have a group of kids show up at our porch, and there'd be a 2-year-old. They'd been staying for hours.
And you're like, where is the mom? Does she know where her 2-year-old is?
That 2-year-old was just with the group, And so anyhow, I needed to homeschool. I needed to get things done. And the way we worked it is how we built our house. And since Chaba knew this, we had a sleep house. And we had windows that we had half curtains on that you couldn't look in. Otherwise, people would be looking in all the time. And I can't handle that.
No, that would definitely go beyond my privacy bounds as well.
I need my
all of a sudden you look
time.
up and there's all these little faces peering in the window.
And it could be all day because other missionaries didn't do this. And it was really hard. They had faces lying in the window, just walking in the house because they have a different concept of personal space. And so Chaba knew that the acceptable place to receive people is on the outside porch. So we had an eating kitchen with a dining room where we could receive more important guests. That's cultural. And a kitchen. And then at right angles with a closed-in courtyard so that the kids could have some toys without them disappearing. And then we had the sleep house, which had a living room. And then we had half curtains, so we could recede there and get some personal space. And then, Chaba's translators, we would invite into, the living room, the inner chamber, etc. But the acceptable place to receive people is the outside porch. And so people would come in, they go, 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 and they clap their hands, and then I would call out their name, and I go, ayo, and then go out. And then we have also a cook, which is also very cultural. If we didn't have one, that would be kind of breaking culture because we'd be denying someone a job. And he ended up being quite instrumental. His name's Jambe, and he's in the pages of all these. Has a heart for the Bakwe, an incredible evangelist. And my daughter named her son after him.
That's special.
And Jim Wilson, too, who's an evangelist. So
That's so special.
So that way, John B. would go out, give them water. And if I was busy with homeschooling, I could tell him, I can't come out. And then he would go out and receive them. And then my husband, it was just somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And then he would come back, at 4:00 and then visit. But then we had the village kids. The village kids would come over and they'd be there making a ruckus, 30 of them just as like, and so I had to, Chavez says, well, they have to learn what they can do and what times are, because we have to live here too with them. And so I told the kids, okay, I'm doing school. Sorry, come back when the sun is this high. That's about 3:00. And so they'd go away, come back 2 hours later.
Okay.
Okay, kids, still doing school, come back when the sun is this high. And then when 3:00 came, my kids would come out and the old rusty trikes and trucks would come out. And it's just one big, joyful, loud, bustling group of kids.
So fun for your kids.
Yeah.
But also a great way. I'm sure the village children learned your schedule pretty quickly. Like, okay, every day.
I don't know about quickly, but I kept at it. And then the eating house, we actually had the windows high, so you couldn't look directly in. So that if someone came during meal times, Chavo would go out, but the kids and I could keep eating. Otherwise, we would have to stop eating too. In other words, if he didn't want to invite someone in for some reason.
They weren't able to see that you were still eating your meal.
Yeah.
That would be a little unnerving to have people staring at you while you're eating.
Well, if they know you're eating, you have to invite them in.
Yes.
But oftentimes he would. But usually it would be people that he knew more closely. We would have local pastors, translation team and whatnot. And but for the story I'd like to read at the end, it shows about how we did some actual village hospitality. It's very different.
I can imagine if 30 kids are showing up on your doorstep every day, I can imagine what it would look like if they knew you were eating.
Yeah.
You might quickly run out of food unless you planned for it. You've talked a lot about the importance of hospitality and some of the differences in Africa. Bringing it back to where we live now, of course, we here in Moscow have a university in town as well as a university about 15 minutes away. So there's 2 universities and New St. Andrews College. All of these places have international students, and they're from lots of different countries, and they're coming from a totally different culture into an American culture. I'm sure it's a culture shock. I mean, what are your thoughts on hospitality towards international students? Because I think as Americans, like you mentioned, we want everything to be just right. We want everything to be perfect. We don't know those cultures. We don't know their dietary restrictions or what they expect. And so maybe it's a little bit harder for us to invite international students to our homes or people that aren't just like us. So what are your thoughts on that? And could you offer some encouragement to us Americans?
Yeah. When you're inviting internationalists over, it might be intimidating because they do come from a very different culture. But I would encourage people to still reach out to internationals, that this is a very, very important ministry. Because we as missionaries, it's just life-changing. We go overseas, we live in a village. It's a full life commitment to do that. But we can only reach the lower and the middle class. Our ministry does not reach the upper level. We just don't brush shoulders with them. And so, but when you look at strategic, evangelism, reaching the upper is probably more strategic at that point, even though everyone's important. But when you reach leaders, you can change a country faster than from the ground up. Now, the ground up is important. Idi Amin came to America, I understand, for college. How would history have changed if someone had invited him over and kept at it? You get future rulers, future leaders, very influential people. You get the upper crust. And when they come overseas, they're going through culture shock. And they are open. They're not open in their own countries. And so when they're open, just to have a smiling face saying, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? It might be intimidating, but the good it can do. And they know that you're not going to do everything right because you're different. But it's the opening of the heart. That's what's important. They felt received. And then a relationship can spark. Like the wives are usually, they'll accompany their husbands, but they're often very lonely. What an influence, especially in a closed Muslim nation where the wives cannot even go out. They can be reached here.
Yes, here they're coming to a place, I would say almost all of them have no family.
Right. They're all by themselves.
They're by themselves. Yeah. Completely new culture. I mean, imagine if, well, you have done it. I'm imagining if I went to Africa by myself or with, my husband or son, just a small little, I wouldn't know anyone. Yeah. I wouldn't know how to do anything. Right. I wouldn't know how to use the grocery store, how to pay. I mean, you would feel very alone and just discombobulated, and having someone bring you in, show you love and friendship. Yeah. And you're in someone's home, you're having a conversation, they're helping you adapt to the culture. I mean, of course, you're going to open your heart to that person.
Yeah. And that's how they perceive. When you're invited in, it has huge significance. You've opened your heart. Now, you may not know the idiosyncrasies of a culture. So just like a missionary, you have to, be okay with making some mistakes or being, laughed at or, just whatever. You just have to get over that. I mean, in the village, we were laughed at so much.
I can imagine.
All self-esteem just goes out the window. So you have to be willing to take that risk. And then you can say, do you have dietary restrictions? Like with a Muslim, you don't serve pork.
And those things you can Google. You can try to, you're not going to do everything right.
Right.
But you could try, you could look up some things like dietary restrictions and various. I remember a story, it was years ago when I think it was President Bush. I want to say it was George Bush, the younger one. I could be wrong. He was in a foreign country and he had had a meal with the dignitaries of wherever he was, and the meal had ended, everything had gone well, but at the very end he just noticed something was off, something isn't right, there may be some whispering. Anyway, the end of the story was someone whispered in his ear that where he was in this culture, to show your appreciation for the meal and that you liked it, you needed to burp really loud.
Oh dear. That's true.
The president of the United States had to drum up a very loud burp.
Yeah, these are things you learn.
Yeah. And then everyone was happy again because they weren't quite sure they were like getting offended because he didn't enjoy their food.
Oh, that's so funny. But being a missionary, there's so much that we don't know. We have to rely very much upon God and faith. And so we let him take our efforts and then turn it around and cause blessing, because we're just going to goof it up. And so in looking to him in faith, he can take what we do and cause it to be received over there by love, even though we might have done cultural faux pas. And so I think it's just getting beyond yourself and what people think of you, which is a good thing.
Yes,
hey.
Yes.
But I think with the Ministry for Internationals here, especially by the universities, it doesn't take a lot of investment like it does for a missionary to go overseas into a village. And so you can be in the comfort of your home and you can be changing nations.
That's a very interesting perspective. Very interesting perspective, because you're right. A lot of times those international students are ones from the wealthy families who could afford to do something like that. Can you imagine the amount of money it would take to send your children overseas for years and pay for a college and all of that? So it's very interesting. So tell us a little bit about a menu you might choose to serve when you are hosting people in your home.
Well, this is West African, and our cook made it all the time. And my daughter wrote it down. She had to cook it up just to write down what it is. And
Because he would just throw things in a pot.
yeah.
No measurements.
And there's a lot you could add. And this is taken from Rachel Jankovic's Hot Providence. But it's called groundnut stew or peanut sauce. It's basically you chop up onions and add bouillon and garlic and diced tomatoes. And our cook throws in a whole bunch of other stuff, West African.
Are the spices pretty common, things that we would find?
Yeah, jalapeno peppers.
Okay.
But I don't like things hot, so we asked them to take those out. But the Africans like it hot.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then you add peanut butter, and then you have to, stir it down so the water evaporates, and then it gets to be a thick sauce. And then you put that over rice.
That sounds delicious.
And that is...
Is it vegetarian, or does it have meat in there?
Oh, yeah. You can add whatever meat you want.
Okay. What do y'all have, or what did you have in Africa?
The Africans will usually use some type of dried fish, and we'll often use smoked mackerel. For everyday eating, it'll be usually some type of fish. We're fairly close to the ocean. And then for us, once a week, we'll butcher chicken like on Sunday because we had chickens. And then beef is probably a little bit more rare. I mean, they walk the cows down from Burkina Faso, and they're pretty tough. So our cook would have to go into the open market, to the stall and get beef, and then we'd have to pressure cook it to death.
Make it tender.
But that would be, their diet is mainly the fish.
On your recipe here that I'm looking at, it does say beef, but you could substitute in chicken.
Yeah, I would say in America it's probably easiest just chop up some beef. Mm-hmm. But you could do chicken. You could do whatever you want.
What kind of beef cut would you use here in America typically? Like a stew meat? Some stores actually have that.
It could be stew meat. I guess when I make it, I probably use more chicken. Mm-hmm. I guess if you stew meat.
Stew meat does need to cook for a while to break down and to become tender.
Yeah. I guess we're kind of, if you're budget minded, you don't want to use steak, but.
Just, saute up some steak. Cut that into some cubes. Start your stew that way. Is this a one pot meal? You said you served it over rice.
Yeah.
Do you typically serve anything else with it?
Oh, yeah, this is interesting. And with an African meal, they usually don't have dessert. And that story that I'll read will show you about it.
Is it because it's not readily available? Sugar's a rarity? Or is
they don't
that
have
just...
ovens. They cook over the open fire. Yeah. I mean, they'll have market women will be cooking donuts. And then some market women will actually have like a mud oven that can make little cakes, but they'll sell those. And so our people are cocoa growers, and they didn't even know what we did with the cocoa.
Really?
Yeah.
All they knew is that they could sell the plant?
Oh, no, the beans. There's an intricate process of...
For the beans?
Of roasting them, fermenting them, turning them, drying them, and then they sell them to the Lebanese, which are the middlemen, who sell them then to factories.
When you did chocolate, or hot chocolate, was that the first time that they had tasted it? Is that part of your story too? Am I jumping ahead? Okay, I'm jumping ahead. I'm getting into her story before we can tell this story. Okay, before we move on to the story, is there any kind of shortcut or time saver that you use to make this stew? Can you make it ahead of time and serve it, or is it best really the day of?
You can freeze it. You can make it ahead and keep it in the refrigerator, the sauce and everything. I think the rice is probably better, cooked right up.
Sure.
It gets a little bit dry. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can freeze it or whatnot. You can make up large batches.
Yes, and then pull it out of the freezer and have an instant meal. Just cook a pot of rice and you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What is your best prep tip when you were inviting people into your home? How did you prepare for them? I know the culture in Africa was very different. And so really you weren't trying to prepare for them because it happened every day. You just had to accommodate. I think we need to jump into her story. She has a prep tip and talks about warm hospitality in her story. We're going to go ahead and hear this story because everything I'm asking, I think I'm jumping ahead and she might answer it in her book. So this is the second book again, and it's at the beginning, towards the beginning of the book.
The first, what I read from was the first book, At the Edge of the Village.
Oh, I may have said it wrong earlier. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen. But the first book was the one on hospitality. The second book has this story.
It has a story, yeah.
Okay. Tell us this amazing story.
Okay, this is chapter 3. The guests. In seeking to be accepted by the villagers, hospitality was another important part of the culture that we engaged in when we could. But it was sometimes fraught with surprises, and it often felt unprepared when we invited guests to eat. What did hospitality look like in the village? It had been our experience that when we invited 5 people, 10 would come. We might invite them for noon, but they'd show up at 3, since time didn't have the same meaning. If they didn't show up at 3, then we might have to go looking for them to remind them to come. When they came, they might not know when to leave. They could be there for the rest of the day or evening. You just never knew, but that was village hospitality for you. I looked out the kitchen door and was amazed because I saw 12 men arriving for dinner. I said to John Bay, "Okay, that's 2 more than expected. Put on some additional plates." John Bay dutifully put on 2 more plates. A little time passed and 5 more walked down our sandy driveway. I called out to John Bay, "Add 5 more." I heard a scuffling in the kitchen and knew my orders were being carried out. In the meantime, Chaba and I were greeting men, welcoming them into the dining room off the kitchen. The dining room was quickly filling up with Bakwi men, much more than we had expected. There was a lag time when 3 more stragglers came, wanting to join the party. Jambi bustled around adding more plates. The room was now full, and we were ready to begin, even though we had now doubled the guest list. We had asked the chief who should be invited, and he gave us a list of 10 men, but 20 were now there. No matter, we just sat them down at 2 long tables made of boards slapped over sawhorses. These were adorned with bright patterned cloths with a bottle of Coke at each plate. After our yard worker had dashed off to get some more. Jambi, being African, had cooked a feast knowing what would happen to the numbers, and there was enough. Chaba said a prayer, and then Jambi passed the rice down the first row of men. Each man heaped rice high in his plate as the bowl went down the tables. They then waited patiently, actually more expectantly, for the main attraction. This came in the form of a beef dish, which was passed down the line of hungry men. They liberally applied the meat to the rice. When a different dish of chicken and sauce came round, they garnished the rice even more. When a third dish arrived, this proved problematic since there was no more room on their plate. But the food still kept coming, so they stuck some of the meat in their pockets, thinking of their families at home. In Bakwi society back then, the men ate separately from the women. That's why there were no women there. Oh. And even in their own fires, the men would eat separately, even from their wives.
At a different time or just separated?
I think just off to the side or something.
Off to the side.
And things are probably changing now, that it might be becoming more westernized. Mm-hmm. With our translator, he was influenced by us, so he did start eating with his wife.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. So if we had invited women, they would not have felt comfortable. Mm-hmm. But in the cities, that's no problem because it's more westernized. Mm. The men ate meat and relished it. They ate chicken, chewed the bones, sucking the delicious marrow, then spat the remainder on the floor. They talked, joked, and laughed through it all. Then came the dessert of chocolate cake. Normally there is no dessert in a Bakwe meal except for peeled oranges for special occasions, so this was a novelty. What was also a novelty was that we served chocolate cake to the very men who grew the cocoa beans themselves, since Ivory Coast is one of the world's largest cocoa producers. One fellow, after tasting the cake, said, "Aha, so this is how our cocoa beans are being used. This is good. Why don't we do this?" So they ate cake and stuck it in their pockets and drank Coke while jokes were made, and laughter rang around the table. Everyone had a great time. They thanked us profusely and left without leaving a crumb behind them literally, as the leftovers went home in their pockets.
I can imagine beef and cake in pockets.
And chicken.
And chicken.
But the important thing there is our cook knew African society, and so he made a lot. And it just kept coming and coming.
Yes. What a blessing to have an African cook.
Yeah, really.
And someone who knew this society, because
I couldn't have survived there without it.
I was feeling a little panicky as you were reading your story and saying, okay, 5, then 10. At some point, how in the world do you even have enough food? I mean, that's how I would think as an American, how in the world. But he knew. He knew to just pretend we're not inviting 5 or 10, we're inviting 20 or 30.
And it's also a faith issue. We've learned to rely a lot upon God. It's just like, God, please multiply this.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been other times where we were at the table and then we had a crowd in and we hadn't even planned to have people. And I'm just like, God, please make sure there's enough. And there was.
There always was.
I don't know how, but there was.
It's amazing. So your best prep tip is to have an African cook.
Yeah, that's great.
I feel like I might need one in my life.
Because so much here in America takes the place of a cook.
Mm-hmm.
Like he has to go to the market and go from stall to stall and barter. And then he has to ride his bike all the way back. And then the rice, since we have field rice, he has to put in a fanner and he'll fan it up and it will go through the wind and the wind will take the chaff away. And then he has to put it in a basin and add water to it and kind of stir it around and sift it so that the stones fall to the bottom. Okay, so all that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
it's not like going to Costco and buying a bag of rice.
Yeah. Pretty much everything is done there from scratch. I mean, if I wanted crackers, I would have to make them. But we could get French bread. So that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And he would often just go to the village and go to a stall and get French bread.
So that really was a full-time job for someone to feed a family. It
actually is.
I mean, I feel like as a mom, sometimes it can be a full-time job, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But if you're feeding an entire family plus all the guests that are coming in, that would be a big job. And like you say, everything's made from scratch. You know, you're not going to buy a bag of rice. You're having to go through a whole process to even prepare the rice to cook. So that would be a big job.
Thankfully, we didn't, it wasn't, there were many meals that it was our family. That was more the norm. But sometimes when, people would come and we felt, we really should invite them in. Mm-hmm. Our cook, he always makes more.
That's wonderful. Does he still live there?
Yeah, he has his own farm now and he has his plantations. And so he's in a different part of the country.
Okay.
But when we go back there, he often will come back and cook.
Oh, that's so fun. Great memories.
Yeah.
Do you have a must-have kitchen item?
A pressure cooker.
A pressure cooker. Did you have that in Africa?
Oh, we needed one.
Okay.
Because the chickens, they ran around a lot. And so they're pretty tough.
So you pressure cooked all of your meats.
Yeah. And then to make things go quicker, we would pressure cook because he would have all these like sauces, okra or greens. And we use a pressure cooker just all the time.
Do you still use it now that you're back?
I do because it cuts the time of cooking meat, I think, down by a third at least.
Do you have a favorite brand you use? There's lots of them out there now. The Instapot, Ninja. Do you have one that you prefer?
Well, I've always been used to Presto, so I use that.
Okay.
But the Instapot, I think, is same concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great idea. So the chocolate cake, just going back to dessert, is that a recipe that your cook made, or had he ever made a chocolate cake before? Or was that one of your American recipes?
No, it was a recipe we got from a missionary cookbook. It's called Wacky Cake. And it just uses baking soda and I think some type of maybe yogurt or something, to cause it to rise.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so it uses the very least of the ingredients. And we actually grew our own cocoa just for fun.
Really?
And so the kids would harvest the pods and then they'd lay them out on mats and then ferment them. And then we would grind it up. Now, normally it would go to a processing facility to take out the cocoa butter. Mm-hmm. But we just lumped the whole thing in and just used one of those hand grinders. And it made good chocolate cake. It was the lumpiest chocolate cake I've ever eaten.
It tasted good, so that's what matters.
Yeah, it tasted good. And we also grew our own coffee, just about 6 bushes. Now, we didn't know how to roast it, but I was just into trying everything.
Well, for
just
sure.
For the fun. I mean, we had every imaginable fruit tree on our property. We want something, we just go out and get a coconut or get a passion fruit or whatever.
Well, that's pretty incredible. Did you ever figure out how to roast coffee? I mean, did you ever roast your own coffee beans?
Oh, yeah.
Where you could drink it?
Well, we did drink it. It wasn't the best coffee. I mean, there's a finesse to it.
There is.
And we had kind of a dilapidated oven that we got used by the side of the road. They have Africans who will take and put ovens together, from people who are selling them. And so, the tray kind of slanted and then it rusted out because it's really humid there. And so you could see, the ground from that. And so it's very interesting. Like the cake would be really high on one side and kind of low on the other. And
because the rack was at an angle.
Yeah, the rack was at an angle. And so, yeah, it made interesting chocolate cake, and our coffee was interesting.
Barely drinkable. That's interesting coming from a place that grows cocoa beans and coffee beans. So your third book, you mentioned there's a fun story in there as well. Her third book coming out any day, All Your Waves and Billows. Do you have a story you want to share from that book?
In that book, it's different from the other two. It's more serious. It centers around just God working through suffering and what he taught us. So it's going to be a little bit more somber, but I do like to pepper it with fun stories. And one story is we had to, evacuate. And so we ended up in Mali at the center up there. And my health completely crashed. And that was a huge trial for me where I was a functional shut-in. It was that bad. And so it took a while to find an African cook. And my daughter, in the meantime, I had to cook for the family. And she was a senior in high school and she just had to take over. And so we eventually did find a cook. It came from another missionary. It was really interesting he was also, did stuff around the house. Mm-hmm. And I come in one day and I saw that my floor is being mopped with Listerine. Oh. I forgot to tell him what. And then another time I saw him scrubbing up the toothbrushes with Comet. So I forgot to tell him not to use that either. So anyhow, you never know quite what to expect.
That's
and one
pretty
time,
great.
He was making lunch. And I walked into the kitchen and I go, oh, what's that stench? Did something die? And he says, oh, it's probably just the fish I put in the sauce. And I go, was the fish rotten? He says, oh, as a matter of fact, yes.
But he thought it would just become better in the sauce?
No, actually, it's a Malian delicacy.
Oh.
They do something with the fish where they let it, I don't know, ferment, but it just smells rotten. The other missionaries warned us about it, and I was hoping never to experience it. But I'm sure it was safe to eat, but I just couldn't.
Oh, the smell was just awful.
It was too bad. And so I said, I'm not crazy about fish in the sauce. Could you remove the bits? And he looked a bit hurt. And so I said, well, but he did remove them. And then later on, at the meal, he was serving it. And I was poking around and I said, oh, I wonder what these things are. And so I went back into the kitchen. I was saying, what are these? And he says, snails. Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Don't know that I love those in the sauce either, but
yeah, I know.
At this point, we're just going to try it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we ate it. It was good.
Oh.
But it was kind of humorous. And Chava says, well, he'll just have to learn what we like and don't like. And so then I decided, why don't we do an Ivorian meal? Because we're up in Mali. Mm-hmm. And so I was telling him about, okay, well, you want to take the okra and chop it up, and then you take the palm oil, the red palm oil, and et cetera. And then I was getting a running commentary as he was doing. He says, oh, this is awful. Oh, look at this. Oh, no Malian would ever eat this. How can they eat such food down? Oh, the food down there is all bad. So it was so funny. And then after he was done, we ate it. He goes, oh, this is really good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're like, this is delicious. And he's like, oh, sticking his nose up at the Southern food.
Oh, we've had some humorous interactions with him. It was really funny. Because they have to learn about us as we learn about them. And one time, we like to, missionaries like to exchange stories. Mm-hmm. And one time this missionary, he had a cook, and over there the water is not safe. So you have to boil it for I would say 20, 30 minutes. And that kills, what you're trying to kill is hepatitis. Mm. And that should do it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the missionary had this new house help. He says, okay, this is what I want you to do. Just put a pot of water on, set a timer for 20 minutes, and then you can turn it off. And so he came back in the kitchen, found a timer set for 20 minutes in the pot of boiling water. I mean, they didn't know why he was just following orders.
Okay, you said to put it in the pot.
Yeah. And another time, with Jambi, our cook, when he first started to work with us, and I said, okay, well, let's have chicken. After you can pluck and then you can clean the chicken. And so I came out later and found out that he had plucked the chicken. It was in a tub of soapy water, and he was washing it. Okay, used the wrong word there.
It's very clean.
Very clean.
Now can you, what's the next word?
So in my books, those stories actually come from my books. They're just, fun cultural differences where they have to go through culture shock with us as well as us with them.
Yes.
And may God help us all.
That makes for some great reading. It's very fun. It's very funny and a very interesting perspective to consider what life is like outside of our own small worlds. Yeah. Just to get out of our own four square walls or small community or even state, country, to see how other people live and how other people think and how other people do hospitality. It's very
But in the South,
fun.
It's different from up here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's probably maybe less of a culture shock, like I don't know that the Southerners be like, oh, I cannot stand Northern food or vice versa. But definitely some differences. I'm sure that because people move so much now that there's a lot of crossover. I know when I was a girl, a really funny story. I have an aunt and uncle in California, and when we would go and visit, we would go through a drive-through, and she would want us to talk. She thought it was so fun. Well, our accents for one, but she would also be like, you have to hear him say y'all.
Oh, yeah.
So she would have us say something to her friends or in the drive-through, and somehow we would say y'all, and that was 30 plus years ago. And up here, my daughter-in-law, we were talking about the word y'all and how do people not say y'all? I mean, it is the
very handy.
best contraction there is.
I know.
Who says you all? That takes way too long. So we were talking about that, and she said, oh, I say y'all. People say y'all. To college people, So I think it's kind of becoming more of a
thing.
Just the cultures are starting to meld. But at the same time, it is different in the South. They still have that. I mean, Southern hospitality has a reputation for a reason. Yeah. They have that warmth and welcoming that it's not there always, but it's definitely there. You can see it in driving. When people are driving, I mean, they'll wave. If you have your blinker on, you're trying to get out or trying to get over, they'll slow down or stop. If you're trying to say get out of a grocery store parking lot, they'll wave you in. And driving in other places, I went when my sister lived in Oregon. The traffic there, she said she didn't even. At one point, she didn't even turn on her blinker because she said if I turn on my blinker and they know I'm about to merge, they'll speed up and they cut her off. They'll be. Oh wow. Mad because you're not getting ahead of me, that kind of mentality. Yeah. It's just so different. And of course, in the South, we hug, what is it? Greet each other with a holy side hug instead of the holy kiss. We've moved on to the holy side hug, and that's different up here too. I'm having to learn, and I still don't have all of the cultural things down here. So I might surprise some of my listeners that live here with a holy side hug. So just be aware. So yes, it is different. And, I like the Southern warmth, but at the same time, you do want to respect how other people do things as well.
Well, I think, there's different cultures, and we're blending more because of just the way the world is today. But there's good and bad about every culture, things that are very positive and things that need to be worked on. Mm-hmm. And I can just imagine in heaven having all the good and none of the bad. Mm-hmm. But we can learn from each culture. There's things that the American culture can learn from the African culture or the Southern culture, the North to the South, And so it's taking the good, embracing it, and recognizing what our own cultural weaknesses are and trying to overcome because they are there. And when you leave the area, you're more aware of them.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point to look at each place and say, what are the great things here that I need to adopt? Because every place has their own strengths.
Yeah, they do.
So Lisa, you also do a support group. I don't know if you call it that. You also do a group called Don't Waste Your Trials for local ladies. And this is another great form of hospitality. So on my podcast, most of the time we're talking about meals and inviting people to your home and that sort of thing. But hospitality can take many forms, and we've touched on that here before. But this is a great form of hospitality. You are praying for women, seeking out their needs, looking to minister to them in whatever circumstances, whatever trial God has for them in their lives. So tell me a little bit more about what your group does, or what you and the other ladies do to minister to these ladies.
Yeah, it's a prayer group called the Don't Waste Your Trials prayer group. And it defines who we are. In other words, we all go through trials. Mm-hmm. And some people end up going through more severe trials than others. And it's easy going through a long-term trial just to feel like you're off to the side and forgotten. I mean, needing support and everything. And so we created this prayer group to be able to minister to women in those type of situations. Mm-hmm. What we do is we have a private Facebook page, and women can share, prayer requests. Oh, please pray, I'm going in for surgery, or I just had chemo and I'm struggling, and we pray for them. And then we have a core group of leaders. And these leaders, we have a private signal group where we're going back and forth, usually daily. Is like, oh, have you checked up on so-and-so? And, oh, I think this person needs a text. And these women just kind of have the gift of encouragement. Mm-hmm. And they will invite women they think are hurting over, for lunches. We will go visit people. We will take them flowers and books. We have kind of like a book ministry too. And just, we kind of feel out, do they want encouragement? They want someone to walk beside them. And then we'll kind of divvy up, okay, well, I've got this person. Then we try to walk them through as long as they want it. Mm-hmm. We've gotten really positive results back where they will feel loved.
Mm-hmm. This is a great idea because it's so personalized and you're reaching ladies in your community. But this is such a great idea for ladies in any church. And also to just not do it alone, because one person does not have the capacity or time, time constraints, money constraints, all of those things, emotional constraints to do it by themselves. But to have a group of people who can, like you said, divvy it up, whether it's prayer, visits, cards, calls, texts, flowers, it can really reach a lot of ladies in your local community and church.
Yeah, and I think having people to do it with is really important, because women, especially those who are more gifted, with compassion, their pitfall is going to be feeling guilty. Mm-hmm. And we don't want that. Mm-hmm. In other words, God only gives us what we can handle. Mm-hmm. And there's also priorities, like our families come first. And then when we have extra time over, then we'll reach out from there. But God gives all that we need to do all that he wants us to do. And when we're feeling burdened, like, oh no, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. Mm-hmm. Well, then we're outrunning God. So we have to pull back and make sure that we're staying behind him and doing what his bidding. And then it's blessed. Mm-hmm. And there have been times where with the leaders in our private signal group where we'll say, okay, I noticed that so-and-so went in for surgery. Can anyone handle this one and just, drop in? And no one could, because they were all busy with their own family. So I said, okay, this one's off our plate. Mm-hmm. And then we have to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. Like, we're just doing God's work. We're not trying to be God.
Guilt is a thing a lot of ladies do struggle with. And I think it's a very good point, what you're saying. God gave us 24 hours in a day. He gave each of us various gifts and tasks and limitations. And so to feel guilt and burdened for all these tasks that are out there would be inappropriate, because God gave you some to do and not all.
Yeah.
And so you have to look and say, what are the tasks that God has in front of me that he's given me to do? And just because there is a need doesn't mean that you are tasked with fulfilling that need.
Right.
I know when I was raising young children, that came up a lot, because there is a lot of serving that could happen in a church community. There is a lot of things that could be done. If you have a larger church, if you have an email that comes out and there's meals to take, or a Bible study, or a group, or, can you help with this event? There's so many things when you're raising young children, if you said, yes, 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 I'll serve on all these. Oh, yes, I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do that. And all of a sudden your family's neglected.
Yeah.
That's not the task God gave you at that moment in time. God gave you first and foremost your family to raise, and then can you do maybe one of those things, two of those things? You do have to recognize God gave you limitations, and not every service project or commitment is something you have to fulfill.
Yeah.
You have to see, what does He want me to do?
Yeah, we call that guarding the center. We had to do that a lot in Africa because being in a village in Africa is like drinking from a fire hose. It's a blast of humanity, and it can be overwhelming. And so we had to guard the center. Like if there was a funeral and then Chaba was pulled out quite a bit, for that, well, then we had to regroup later. We had to always be constantly, how are the kids doing? We wanted to make sure the kids were filled first, and their marriage is strong, and their own personal lives with the Lord was not being neglected. And so when you guard the center, then you're strong there. Then you take on things from there. If the center is not strong, then you pull back the extremities until the center is strong again. With the Don't Waste Your Trials, one thing that has been helpful is the women that do the lunches. We have kind of a lunch ministry too, where once a month they'll invite women over. They do it in threes. One person brings bread, one person brings soup, and so it's easier.
It's very doable then if you're sharing the load with someone else, and more fun.
Yeah.
Always more fun with a friend. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been fabulous. Her books, you are actually in the process of recording them, audio recording, where they could be listened to as audio books on Canon Plus. All three of them?
Well, I'm almost done with the first, and then we'll go on to the second, and I understand that on to the third.
Okay. So it'll take a little bit of time.
It'll take a little bit. I'm not the best reader.
Pretty soon, no, you're a great reader. Pretty soon, ladies, throw on those headphones. You'll be able to listen to the audiobooks while doing dishes, or mopping the floor with Listerine, scrubbing your toothbrushes with Comet. All of those things that you might adopt from the African society. No, skip those things, for real. It has been so great to do this podcast with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and telling us about your experiences and just the things you've learned about hospitality from being an African missionary.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. Today happens to be the first anniversary of the podcast. Last year on August 10th, I released the first episode. Today, I am releasing the 54th episode. I am so glad that you are tuning in every week. Thank you so much for sharing it with your friends as well. I am going to celebrate by hosting a giveaway on my Instagram page, so be sure to go there to enter. If you aren't a subscriber, look for come.over.for.dinner. And that's me. You'll find the giveaway there. I post every week announcing the episode, as well as some other fun things. Sometimes we do polls. Sometimes I do giveaways. It just depends. So you should subscribe there as well.